So welcome back to lecture 10. This is objective 4. It was part 3, objective 4, and we're also going to look at objective 5. So objective 4 is how do we identify and discuss what can be done at organisational level to encourage ethical behaviour. Now I want us to remember as we discuss these things that not all of these are effective in isolation. It's important that they actually become embedded into the culture rather than just stay over the top of the organisation as, say, a set of goals that may or may not be implemented. So firstly, we institutionalise ethics by having highly visible commitment to ethical behaviour by the top management. So that's things we've talked about in the last objective. Encourage members to take moral responsibilities seriously, so that fits into culture. End defensiveness in the face of public criticisms, be open, be proactive. Solicit the opinion of stakeholders and conduct ethical audits of organisations' policies and procedures. And the Donald Trump video you'll watch at the end of this, the Rachel Maddow discussion of a Trump investment, touches on some of those things. And corporations should recognise that the pluralistic nature of the social system of which they're a part, they can not only service their own interests, they have to service a broader range of stakeholder interests as well. So how can we do that? We can do that through ethical programs. Sorry, that was my phone just ringing in. We can do that through ethical programs. Ethical programs are things like a code of ethics, policy and procedures outlining how you investigate allegations of unethical behaviour, how you will discipline allegations of unethical behaviour, how you will discipline actual unethical behaviour. The policies outlining incentives and rewards for ethical behaviour, and ethics compliance officer or a committee. So that's 4 things that we can do to support ethical behaviour. But there are other things that you may implement as part of these ethical programs that are involved not only what you have, but how you support it. You can support it through ethical training. You can support it through ethical helplines. You can support it through monitoring systems. And you can support it through ethical audits, pre-employment ethics, and screening of applicants. Now, those things sort of overlap, don't they? The first 4, which are what are ethical programs, and some of these things are actually more about how you'd implement the ethical program. So there's an overlap between those 2 things. So let's start by looking at some of them in roughly the order that I've just put them up. So, codes of ethics are statements by the organisation about what is right and what is wrong and how they will behave. In earlier classes, we showed the code of ethics for Nike, the code of ethics for Reebok as examples of ethical codes. But the problem with ethical codes is that sometimes they can just be window dressing. They can just be something that's a statement that's never referred to. Something to demonstrate to one or a set of outside stakeholders that that's what you intend to do. It needs to also be supported by the way the organisation operates. We're going to talk about those things in a moment. Should have reasonable goals and sub-goals. Should consider the target audience in terms of its purpose and comprehensiveness and relevance within particular contexts. And what that means is the way you communicate ethical behaviour needs to actually be related to what the real behaviours at different levels in the organisations, or the real behaviour that you expect in different transactions between the organisation and its stakeholders. Sometimes codes of ethics are written as high objectives, but there's no way that they can easily be operationalised, or that the people who see these high objectives don't realise how that they can model a behaviour in their current job that reflects those objectives. Should also convey the board's commitment to ethical standards and be based on principles that aim to raise ethical sensitivity and confidence in employees towards achieving that goal. So it shouldn't be too much tied to punishment. It should be tied to a positive perception of ethics as the way that it contributes to the organisation's performance, not to the way it might punish an individual or detract from organisational performance. Second area to look at is policies. Complementary policies that support a code of ethics can be things like the Whistleblower Act, and we've talked about whistleblowers earlier in the course, and internal whistleblower policy as an example of something that could support a code of ethics. Some behaviour is observed that is not in line with the code of ethics. How does a person in the organisation express that issue? Second method that we talked about is ethics committees. The committee, most private companies, lots of public institutions have ethics committees. They can be ethics committees for a whole organisation. They can be ethics committees, for example, about research. They can be ethics committees about human resources. So in fact, some organisations have multiple ethics committees. The committee should have full authority and responsibility to communicate the code and subsequent decisions to the members of the organisation. They should be the people responsible for clarifying and interpreting code when the need arises and facilitates the use of that code. People in the organisation need to be trained in what is expected as ethical behaviour in the organisation. At the minimum, they should understand the code, review the company's procedures for handling ethical problems, and discuss an employer and employee responsibilities and expectations. Now, I've moved around a number of universities and private organisations in the last 2 or 3 years since I sort of retired from my associate professorship, but as a full-time employee. And every time I seem to do this new online ethical training related to the code. And I find that is probably pretty superficial and frequently in the organisations, not this organisation, maybe other. I never hear anything talked about ethical behaviour. So ethical behaviour is an important thing in training to actually be not only in the training, but also be reflected in a committee support, in related policies, and probably in reward systems. Reward systems should motivate our behaviour for employees about rewarding their intrinsic and extrinsic needs, having discipline as well if people do not behave ethically, to encourage ethical behaviour. Reward systems need to be ethical in themselves. They need to be clear, visible and consistent, and encourage ethical behaviour in line with the code of conduct and the behaviour that should be modelled by the top management team. There's a lot of research that shows that companies perform poorly at setting and measuring non-financial targets. We've talked a little bit in other courses about balanced scorecard and triple bottom line and stakeholder performance. So you need to have internal monitoring systems related to those policies and programs, but you may also need to have external advice on setting up programs and structures designed to enforce and embed ethical standards. And in fact, there's a recent study by KPMG. Few Australian companies appear to possess an explicit reporting framework to underpin their ethical commitments, and that boards are most likely to reflect on ethical issues following media exposure, episodes of high turnover, and remuneration reviews. And in some of the things that you have done for your case, you will have seen that the sudden focus on changed behaviour in the case study that you have developed and presented and submitted didn't happen until there was either a whistleblower or there was a whistleblower that had large amounts of media coverage. And for those of you who did 7-11, that's very clear. Right, so that's the how you institutionalize ethics. As I said, we've got a video from Rachel Maddow on an investment that the Trump organization had, and how that reflects stakeholders, and you can reflect on that and how it might affect ethical codes of conduct, or how an ethical code of conduct may have been beneficial in that system. But I also want to talk about, as our last objective, how ethical behaviour and economic performance relate to each other. Now, just at the moment, we're quite frequently seeing COVID-19 being described as a choice of going back to work, an economic choice that we should go back to work because the economy's stopped and it's crippled and that will have bad effects. And the health, i.e. ethical issue of, well, we don't want people to die. And sometimes it's then couched in terms of, well, what about all these ethical issues of people not having enough money to live? But in reality, if we think about COVID-19, the ethics of COVID-19 are that it is a health problem that's causing the economic issue, because dealing with the health problem is causing the economic issue. So we need to ethically deal with the health problem so that we can emerge in the mid to long term with a strong economy. So until we deal with one, we can't really deal with the other. So that's why we have to focus on health in our rebuilding of the economy. So it's a company's moral duty to respect the rights and dignities of employees. We talked about that. It's many companies have embraced triple bottom line or balanced scorecard approaches to measuring how they affect their employees and their other stakeholders. We talked about a little bit of that when we've talked about in the previous weeks of this course, when we talked about aspects of stakeholders and different contexts in which ethical behaviour occurs. And we had a whole week in which we talked about the economic issues related to business ethics. And so this is about how you lead an organisation to achieve those economic outputs. Profit-making and ethical business are not mutually exclusive. In fact, I look at the Uni superannuation. There are two options within the Uni superannuation for high growth. One is just called high growth, and one is called high growth, sustainable and ethical. The sustainable and ethical has outperformed. The high growth, sustainable and ethical has outperformed the high growth over the last 3 years, including losing less than the high growth in this downturn. So clearly, organisations can be profitable if they behave ethically. And there's other things that flow out about organisational profitability and ethical because ethical behaviour is about the relationship between the organisation and its customers, the organisation and its suppliers, the organisation and its local community, all of those relationships can affect the profitability of the organisation in the long and the short term. Companies that invest in their employees are likely to reap increased productivity through heightened morale, satisfaction, commitment, and as employees are a key stakeholder of the organisation, not only having a high quality ethical behaviour aligned with a corporate culture that supports that behaviour becomes a key component to ethical business behaviour, a key component to the ethical culture, a key component of the corporate culture, and having a good positive corporate culture can lead to above average returns and high organisational performance. So in summary, from a stakeholder perspective, from a triple bottom line perspective, financial performance, even though it's crucial, relies on your ability to meet your stakeholders' needs, shareholders, employees, customers, communities, and they have to be accepting of the way that profits are earned. Okay, so as I mentioned, there is an interesting video on from Rachel Maddow on a Trump investment, and that video also folds into our tutorial discussion. There is no forum this week because you're all focusing on finishing your assignment and preparing for the exam in 2 weeks' time, so there's no forum. I will see you in today's tutorial and then next week's tutorial as well. Thanks for listening. Be safe.